Before we get started, I don't know, did you hear that harp music? Yeah. Cynthia Krause. And afterwards, we're also going to be treated to some piano by Sarah Wee. That's great, isn't it? Sometimes we kind of hear that harp music anyway in our gallery, don't we? I'm always looking for that head nod, you know, the head nod. Anyway, I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight for the second in our fall gallery series. Today we're treated to the paintings by Bradley Davis. Bradley is a painter from Minneapolis. He's originally from St. Louis, and he went to Harvard University. He didn't really study art there, though first he studied pre-med, and then he studied psychology. He has a degree in psychology from Harvard. And after that, he has traveled to England, to New York, and became involved in art experiences that made him into a painter. I'm sure he will tell us in more detail, but he's been in some amazing group shows and solo shows in places like Bath, England, New York City, and now, of course, Mankato. Please welcome Bradley Scott Davis.
Thank you, Bill. Hi, everyone. So, I'm Bradley Davis, the painter responsible for all the work you see here around you. As you may know, tonight marks the opening of my 20th anniversary of being a painter. And as I told Bill, I'm lucky to say that what you see before you is all the work that's, for one reason or other, not sold. So this is really a poor man's retrospective, meaning it's all for sale. And no trouble has been taken to track down work from anywhere other than from my studio in Edina. That said, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you who made it out to be here tonight. I know it takes something to get here, and there's plenty of other things you could be doing, so thanks for choosing to be here to see the show. And help me celebrate 20 years of painting. I would first like to extend a huge thank you to Bill Bukowski for giving me the opportunity to be here this evening. Thank you, Bill. Also, thank you to Bethany College for having me and being the space for artists to be able to come and speak. I am deeply grateful for this privilege and this awesome occasion. Thank you, Bethany. A big thank you as well to Sue here in the art department for all you have done to make tonight what it is. Your attention, collaboration, preparations are all appreciated greatly. Thank you, Sue. In getting ready for the show, I was fortunate to have the help of my good friend and longtime associate in art, Stephanie Abrams, and her sister, Daughtra, in selecting the work from a formidable mountain of chaos back at my studio. Their careful and excellent eyes, sifting and making sense of 20 years of my work, bringing forth a coherent and beautiful group of paintings, which here tonight will speak on behalf of the multitude left behind. Thank you, Stephanie and Daughtra. Thanks also to Rebecca Heidenberg, whose ideas for the show were invaluable, and for her consideration of the work while visiting my studio in Edina. Finally, a big shout out to my son, Darwin, who's 10, just turned 10, for always being my biggest fan, and for being a true inspiration for me to always be my best self and make my best work. Last and certainly not least, I owe everything to my two amazing, loving, and inspiring parents. My mom, Susan, has supported me in everything I choose to do with her unconditional love. Thanks, Mom. And I owe my early interest in art to my dad's constant exposing us to great museums, and through his interest in collecting, I have been keenly attuned to the world of art and turned on brightly. Also, thank you, Dad, for always being so positive and encouraging about my art and my pursuit of a career in painting. To my brother Brian, my older brother, who lives in Manhattan, I owe a debt of gratitude as well. He has hosted many of my New York shows, put me up in the City of Dreams every visit, and has the distinction of owning the largest collection of my paintings of anyone. Thank you, Brian, for your steady love, friendship, and support. Thanks finally to my good friends Jeff and Melissa and Kathleen for being here tonight. So, on Bill's suggestion, I have divided this evening's talk into 6 sections, and we'll go through each of them, leaving time at the end to speak about a few of the paintings here in the gallery, and of course, for questions at the end. I have said only a little bit here. Please listen carefully and call my attention to that which I have omitted in my talk, or ask about something which hopefully has piqued your interest in me and my art. Thank you. Thank you for indulging me in this luxury to stand before you all tonight and talk about myself. I would love to know about you as well, so please come share with me your story during the reception and tell me about what you're up to and what interests you. So that you have a sense of what's to come, the 6 subject headings I will address are the following. First, what is my background? Apologies in advance for the length of this one. Second, when did I decide to become a painter? And how did my education affect my decision? Third, who are my influences and who are the painters I study? Fourth, what is my typical professional practice? Studio time, working in series, painting schedule, etc. Fifth, how do I get my ideas, for themes or series in my paintings. And sixth is one that I added, which is an abstract statement and a conclusion. So it is my intention to connect with you during my talk, the work you see on the walls, with me, the artist, and as well to connect me with you. Thank you for being here and the opportunity to speak with you tonight. So what is my background? I was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan in 1973. Both my parents went to University of Michigan, where they met, and they both grew up in the Detroit area. My mom's father, Nathan, was in the muffler business, and my dad's dad, who served as a tank driver in World War II, owned a men's clothing store. My grandmothers, Mary Ann and Shirley, were both homemakers and great cooks, and both volunteered at hospitals later in life after their children left home. My dad studied to be a doctor, and after medical school, he took his family to St. Louis, Missouri, where he did his residency at Washington University. Until I was 7, I lived on a tree-lined street in University City, right next to the city of St. Louis. I remember very well the slope of Stratford Avenue, the sidewalks being great width for big wheels, which I rode with alacrity and won the Big Wheel Award on our street on the 4th of July in 1976 as a 3-year-old during the bicentennial celebration parade. Red, white, and blue streamers flying from the plastic handlebars of my big wheel. I also remember the sycamore balls that would fall from the big trees every year, and the big, beautiful leaves, and their gorgeous, mottled, and sometimes flaky and peelable bark. As a young child, there was always activity and love around our home. With 2 brothers and a sister, we were usually playing in the neighborhood or out playing hockey, which I started doing at the age of 5. In 1980, I remember we had just moved out to a new western suburb called Chesterfield, about 20 minutes from the city, to a home my parents helped design in the woods. A nearby lake and creek became my new playground. I remember the abundance of toads and birds and turtles, snakes and fish, and embraced their magic with wonder and great enthusiasm. I spent my time outside, roaming the oak forests, exploring the creek, and fishing at the lake. Shortly after moving to the country, I took an interest at the age of 8 in cooking. My own snacks, usually omelets and ramen noodles. In the 6th grade, my parents put me into a private school, private boys' school, where I had to wear a sport jacket and tie and read books like Brave New World and The Catcher in the Rye. I was challenged by my new school and met this challenge with an increased interest in study. It was at Country Day School where I developed a love for studio art. I was always eager to get down to the basement art rooms and dig into the current project, and often would be the last one to leave the room, making me late, usually for my next class. For our linoleum cut printing project, I remember being proud of my colorful artwork as it was talked about by the art faculty and shown off around the school. The head of admissions requesting one for the wall of his office, and another going in a frame to adorn the wall at my dad's medical office. As a child, my family went on trips to Chicago, where we visited the art museums, and then to Washington, D.C., and London to see the national galleries my dad always spoke of with great reverence. He usually led us around the galleries saying stuff like, "That's Paul Klee, an imaginative Swiss artist," or, "Look at the hands in this painting. Hands are hard to paint, and you can tell how good a painter is by looking at the hands." Or, "These are engravings," or, "These are etchings." In high school, my parents left us kids to tour the Pacific Northwest, visiting artists' studios on a buying trip to open the gallery they never opened, buying up a preponderance of glass and ceramics, which flooded our dining room at home and eventually all got given to lucky school teachers as gifts around Christmas time. We actually grew up Jewish, celebrating the Jewish holidays, although I never went to Sunday school or was bar mitzvahed. From St. Louis, having excelled in my academic and extracurriculars, I was fortunate to attend Harvard College in Cambridge near Boston. At Harvard, I met kids from all over the world, all bright and talented, as well as some great professors such as Jordan Peterson and E.O. Wilson. E.O. Wilson, by the way, is, in my opinion, one of the greatest people still living on Earth. He's just a huge thinker and a great, some people have said that E.O. Wilson is the smartest and most cogent thinker about life on Earth since Charles Darwin. So he's quite the guy. It was not until my final semester, after toiling for 2 years in pre-med classes, when I used my final elective to take a poetry writing class, that I glimpsed a possible artistic path for myself. I loved my teacher, Henri Cole, a visiting professor who'd come to be on Helen Bendler's faculty. Helen Bendler is the world's leading authority on contemporary and poetry in general. She's just a genius. So he came to be with her. And at the time, Henri Cole was the president of the American Poetry Society. And he did not like me in the beginning at all. He kind of suspected that I was up to something, that I was like a senior and a hockey player and, didn't look like a poet and probably had no interest in poetry. And he only really accepted first-year students anyway, as a strict policy. And somehow I got into the class, which was 13 students. And I won him over by my flawless recital of T.S. Eliot's poem, Preludes, which I chose to memorize for an early class. Henri also took a shine to my writing, which he praised for its honesty, originality, and creativity. So I was encouraged. It's like, hey, I could be an artist. A few months later, when I moved to New York City, I was determined to be a poet. No other vocation at the time called to me. And so, living in a big loft off Fifth Avenue in the then very commercial 30s, I wrote notebooks full of poems while supporting myself bartending and working temp jobs in advertising agencies. In New York, I began painting on the walls where I lived. First was a mandala mural, 10 feet in diameter, which began Thanksgiving night, 1997, as a group activity for our dinner party at our popular loft gathering space and home. I would later finish the painting with great zeal. It was during this time I realized my great energy and ability to put paint down on a surface. I quickly made another wall painting in blues and silver and white, which became a subject of interest and was admired at our huge parties we used to throw to raise money for rent and improvements to our commercial loft space. One of my roommates at the time, a guy by the name of Zoran Zagantz, gave me an easel and a little set of oil paints someone had given him, saying I should use them. Then, one night, while walking to get a cab to go up to an art gallery's show at the Armory uptown, I spotted a mountain of discarded canvases on the corner atop a trash heap. I, of course, enlisted the help of all the people that were with me. There were 4 or 5 of us, and, we hauled them back to the loft. These were the first 30 paintings in oil I made, a few of which are here tonight. Excited about painting, I began visiting the Museum of Modern Art with regularity, as well as going to shows at the Guggenheim and the Met. At this point, I was painting as much as I was writing, and soon realized I might be able to sell my work, which was an attractive prospect as there was no commercial value to my poetry. I began hanging out with other painters, some of whom were recent Parsons and Pratt school graduates living in the loft space on our floor, and we talked about painting and shared our work with each other. I was encouraged by my newfound love, staying in at night to paint instead of going out to the bars and clubs. Then I met a girl, Anna, from England, and she loved my art. We became a couple and traveled to New Zealand, where we lived for a year, and I painted full-time. My colorful little paintings on board quickly filling up the coffee shops and restaurants around the town which we lived, called Christchurch. I went around town with a photo album full of samples of my artwork and asked if I could put up art in their cafes. Most of them said yes. With my best work, I approached galleries and asked if I might have a show, and was given a few shows during that wonderful year. A series of sunflowers, New Zealand birds, and a series of the endemic Hector's dolphin, which is a beautiful little animal that only lives in and around the waters of New Zealand. There's probably about 2,000 of them left. But I think they're the smallest dolphin, or the second smallest dolphin. As well as some colorful abstract work involving circles and rectangles. We had to leave New Zealand when our travel visas expired and chose to live in Anna's hometown of Bristol in the southwest of England. There, I continued to paint larger and larger works on campus, mostly geometric stuff, and found success in showing at some beautiful downtown spaces in the vibrant, artsy city of Bristol. In Bristol, I was friends with a community of artistic people my age, including musicians and writers, and was technically not allowed to work for money because of my visa status. So I enrolled in art school in nearby Bath, where Anna and I moved shortly after I began school. At art school, I thrived. Finally, I felt at home with the other students and did all the reading and assignments religiously, earning distinction from the teachers on the program, and I was encouraged, again, determined then to be a painter. I joined a community of artists in Bath, taking a studio at the Bath Artist Studio. At the time, it was called Whitcomb Studios. And I quickly became friends with the guy who started the studios, this great painter, very charismatic person, and a portrait painter. Now I believe he's the leading portrait painter in all of the United Kingdom. And he, at one point, when I was talking to him, he said, I think I've given up on painting. And then the next time I saw him for lunch, he said that he was painting the portrait for the wealthiest person in London. So he's sort of like, dramatic peaks and valleys in his career. And so I joined up with that, got a studio space at a communal studio in Bath called Whitcomb Studios, and it was awesome, I loved it. So through school and afterwards, I made a living by working as a cook/chef in local restaurants. I found that working with my hands, preparing plates of food to be a palatable complement to painting as well as a steady income. In fact, I have been working around food ever since. Chefing in the places that I've lived has been an escape from sinking financially more than a few times. More recently, I started my own cooking classes, doing hands-on demonstrations for residents of the community where I live and work from, currently in Edina, here in Minnesota. So more of my background, I already apologized, so I'm not going to do it again. From England, Anna and I moved to northern Wisconsin and bought a house with a studio in the National Forest near Eagle River. For work, I cooked at the only fine dining restaurant in town, and she got a job writing for a local newspaper and teaching at the area community college. From the studio in Wisconsin, I looked out into the forest with the lake down the hill. I was in paradise. Going from a crowded city in England with a tiny studio with no windows, I was sure I'd arrived. But making a living out in the middle of nowhere became difficult, so we shifted to the Twin Cities. I have now been in the Twin Cities for almost 8 years. Reflecting now on my influences over the years, I have to first say that I have always loved Miro. And I remember being obsessed with the New York school abstract expressionists while living in New York, drawn to their audacity, courage, color, scale, and brash statements. I also loved the work of Robert and Sonia Delaunay early on in New York. I remember when I first started painting just being enamored of the soft, beautiful harmonies of the colors in Delaunay. And then when I went to Paris for the first time, seeing some of the paintings, you know, just kind of blew me away. And incidentally, Robert Delaunay is credited as being one of the first people to make an abstract painting among about 6 other people. So some of his like window series were kind of like, at first there was like the Eiffel Tower in some of his paintings, and then the Eiffel Tower sort of disappeared and it just became kind of these abstract, you know, shapes of color that, you know, didn't really represent anything. And Mondrian, shortly after. In school, I became strongly drawn to Cezanne and Titian, Braque, and de Kooning. Hassel Smith and the San Francisco School of Abstract Expressionism. Those painters were big for me in England as I became good friends with Hassel and his wife Donna, and a frequent visitor to their home and his studio, where I would luxuriate in the presence of hundreds of his large format 6 foot by 4 foot and 6 foot by 6 foot paintings. So Hassel Smith, if you haven't looked him up or heard of him, he's just an underground legend and painting authority. He used to teach out of the California School of Fine Arts with Mark Rothko and Clifford Still, and he was Clifford Still's best friend for a long time, and they, you know, Hassel Smith, amazing guy, and phenomenal painter, very underrated, and actually, as an interesting side note on American painting in general, the sort of heroes that we know of or think about today in Pollock and de Kooning and Rothko, you know, just represented one side of American heroes in painting, which is to say that there were also a group of painters on the West Coast that were doing amazing things that, you know, they were as much a reason for America entering in and onto the world stage of painting, which before that, you know, when the world thought about painters and painting, America didn't even register. You know, it was always the French, the Italians, or some sort of Europeans. So at the mid-century, you know, just like when the Americans won the gold medal in 1980 in hockey, you know, the abstract expressionists in New York, that was like America's shining moment of in painting and in art. And now, you know, we've got great respect. And so I also became interested in some English painters while living in England, like Patrick Heron, Frank Auerbach, Leon Kossoff, David Hockney, Bridget Riley, Damien Hirst, David Cobley, Lucian Freud, Francis Bacon, who was Irish, Howard Hodgkin, Sean Scully, also Irish, Tracy Emin, etc. Lately, I have been interested in Clifford Still, Matisse, Pollock, Rothko, Chagall, Modigliani, and local Twin Cities painter George Farrar. So now on to what is my typical professional practice. Oh, I should also mention Soutine. Early on, Soutine was kind of a huge influence for me. The Russian Jewish painter who painted in Paris alongside other Parisian painters. You know, it's said that de Kooning, you know, was a great admirer of Soutine, who had just such a pure relationship with making paintings and with the material of paint itself that it inspired, you know, others. And Soutine himself was greatly inspired by Rembrandt, and so one of the great things about painting is it's just a never-ending tunnel of being interested and inspired in sort of like music, like who did the Beatles love before they made their music? They would have a lot to say, or the Rolling Stones, if you hear them talk about, why it is that they exist. They would credit all these people, and so it just keeps going back and back and back till you're like in the cave, with the cave paintings, and you're sort of in awe of the act of painting itself, which, is really, I think, in thinking about this talk, it occurred to me that painting, all of painting, when it's a child painting in the kitchen, or it's someone making a painting for class, or it's someone making a painting like after work, or just, because they feel like they want to. Like, all of it is the same thing. It all comes from the same part of the brain where you want to make a mark and see, like, discover what it will look like to you, to your eyes, after you've made it. Like, you apprehend that which you created, whether it was with great intentionality or accident, no matter. You made it, and you see it, and there's an immediate gratification in that transaction that you yourself are responsible for. So all of painting, from Da Vinci to, whatever, whoever the most sort of childish painter, and obviously, in some way, children painting is the purest form of painting, in my opinion. And others have said it too, like Picasso said that, you work your whole life to get to the point where you can paint again like a child. So that said, I want to say about soutine being really important for me. Helen Frankenthaler, Joan Mitchell, Picasso, and Durand, and of course Velázquez, Poussin, and Rembrandt. My working practice is erratic and changes according to my life circumstances. Negotiating studio time with travel plans and being a father to a 10-year-old boy, Darwin, is an ever-changing challenge. I always like to have music playing in the studio. Since my New York days and through art school, I have usually been listening to rock and roll at high volume. I work best when my life is in good order. That is, my house is clean, my communications are up to date, my schedule is on the calendar, and I have food in the fridge. A lot of my studio practice is shaped by my access to materials. That is to say, when I have a lot of paint and ample supply of canvases, I paint a lot, and may be prolific. Commissions can be both rewarding and tedious. When I have a lot of energy and high inspiration, I will usually conceive of a group of or series of work and work at that intently until it's finished. I go to museums often, most frequently nowadays, the Minneapolis Institute of Art, while in England, the National Gallery and Tate Modern, and in New York, MoMA and the Met. I like to go for walks in nature almost daily, always amazed at the beauty, magnificence, and subtlety of the visual aspects to be found throughout the seasons in nature. Chagall said, the painter will always be competing with the flower. My working process hinges on my space, both external and internal. I will never forget reading the great art lecture given by Frank Stella at Harvard as part of the Norton series of lectures, which is entitled Working Space. I first came across this book, which is a book called Working Space, written by Frank Stella. And if you haven't read it, you could check it out sometime. It's really great. You know, it got me present to like, here is this great sort of, you know, abstract painter, post-abstract expressionism from New York, who made like these paintings that were just like colors and lines and very simple, and yet he was just obsessed with Caravaggio, and he had lots to say about, you know, Caravaggio. And then when I was studying, I was just really intrigued by the British artist Bridget Riley, you know, that she, who was a sort of an op-ed 60s kind of famous painter, abstract, you know, that she was just obsessed with the same Cézanne painting that I was like really obsessed with. And, you know, so like, you can't really judge paintings by just, you know, what they are on the surface necessarily. You know, Mondrian talked about the sort of poetics behind his paintings, which were just these grids of colors that, like, behind his art was the mystery, the answer to the mystery, and, you know, secret to the universe, like the meaning of life, the highest order of poetics was being articulated through his language in his paintings. And so, you know, one of the mysteries of painting is really knowing it for what it is and sort of looking at it with a critical and an eye that has some, you know, reverence for what it is. So going back to this Frank Stella Working Space, if you are a painter and have not read it, I recommend checking it out. I have got to be situated comfortably somehow to be ready to begin painting. Oftentimes this requires me rearranging the hanging art inside my studio to get alignment of visual materiality. Other times it does not matter in the least my environs. I recall my first plein air painting outing with the Rats de Champs. We all got off a bus in a cork tree forest at the bottom of a hill. This was somewhere in the south of Spain, where a little stream flowed through, and I wandered around for about half an hour looking for a place, an appealing place to sit and paint. Everyone else had already set up and was well underway painting. I couldn't really find a place to get started. And in the end, settling down to paint on some rocks near the stream, right where I started. Many times I will have to declutter my mind before gaining the appropriate space from which I can create. Making lists of things I need to do can be helpful, or picking up the phone and making a call I need to make, or paying a bill, or doing the dishes. In the end, it amounts to being ready, however that may be, according to the individual requirements of the particular work to be done. Recently, I was reading about the practice of the Chinese masters who would elaborately prepare themselves for painting before, as according to the writer, their materials were scarce and expensive, and hence they could not afford to make any mistakes once their creation was underway. Similarly, I was reading about Adolph Gottlieb, a New York school painter, and he mentioned this idea of being ready to make a painting, that it required him being adequately, as he put it, charged. Yes?
Have you ever sat down and did not see anything like this? Have you ever had painter's block?
Great question. So the gentleman's asking, have I ever like sat down and just been sort of there and not able to paint? And the answer is all the time. Yeah. So a lot of like this sort of idea of getting ready getting into the space of being ready to paint and make something that's worthwhile has to do with life itself. You know, can't go and play your first game of hockey if you're completely out of shape, right? You just like, you know, stink up the ice or whatever. So, you know, and sometimes, you know, it's a fine line between sort of thinking that you have to do all this stuff to be ready and always putting it off, between, you know, actually being able to have the discipline to just show up for work, right? Regardless of how you're feeling or what you haven't done. Or, you know, there's an endless list of things that you could do before you paint, right? So, you know, you have to kind of be responsible for like what really is the case and what's not. So he was talking about being adequately charged before he would begin painting. And Gottlieb also interestingly noted in his interview with David Sylvester, who's a great art writer, who interviewed a lot of great artists, notably Francis Bacon. He said that some of his friends living in Paris encouraged him, this is the New York artist Gottlieb, to travel and live and work from Paris for a time. Upon arriving, he found the energy of the city not to be conducive to his being able to make paintings, preferring, and in the end, returning to the visual aesthetics and the concomitant vibrations, as he put it, of his home-based city of New York. So I've got a little more here, and I want to be responsible for leaving some time at the end here. It looks like just about 5 minutes left here. I'll pick and choose what's worth saying the most. So oftentimes I'll work late at night, and sometimes I'll wake up early in the morning to paint. Many times I'll stop painting when I notice I've come to an impasse, and I'll go out for a walk or something, as opposed to sort of pushing on, you know, respecting that, you know, there's an order. I paint what I love and what I'm connected to, typically. Also that which I find to be beautiful and interesting, or else that which I feel needs to be acknowledged, recognized, or otherwise called attention to, such as frogs, which for me symbolize the fragile life all around us living in nature. Beautiful creatures going about their lives in water and land, in need of ample food and purity of habitat. It actually takes a lot for an environment to be hospitable and sustain a single individual of any one frog species, as each requires its own set of unique aspects which fortify its well-being and provide for its successful procreation. I'm deeply respectful of my subjects and grateful also for their existence. Many times I will be drawn into a series or subject by reading about some environmental concern, or often through direct encounter with my subjects in nature. Other times I will be inspired by a beautiful photo I see of an animal in its natural habitat. Typically, when painting animal subjects, I work from photos of them or artistic renderings of them, sometimes in an old magazine, clipped out, children's books, or field guides. It occurs to me now in writing this that my inspiration and energy to make paintings is limited to the history of painting is linked to the history of painting in some way, that I want my work to be relevant now, today. That is to say that I've got to break free of the subjects used by my standards of measure, my heroes like Titian or Cezanne or Matisse. For example, preferring to use something new rather than, say, referring to old subjects like for Titian, certain mythological themes, or for Cezanne, the landscape of Provence, or for Matisse, the ornateness of beautiful interiors and women. Things have changed, and these subjects would not sustain me like they did them. It's not enough for me to say the south of France is beautiful, or that the female form is exquisitely beautiful. What I have to say must be articulated through the unique choice of my own discovery. That is my challenge as a painter in searching for subjects which, in their choosing, speak loudly themselves through me. Ideally, I am used by my subjects, and they then, in turn, if I am successful, gain their due glory and attention in the spotlight on the canvas. So here's the heroic abstract statement and conclusion, and then I would be happy and honored to take some questions, please. So to wrap it up, just to say this as a painter, I believe in humanity. I believe in the goodness that is the spirit which connects all of us human beings. We can do anything, especially when we work together as a team. I also believe strongly in life itself, which can be found all over our planet. Plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, etc. As humans, we have the power of our imagination and our love. And we must responsibly deal with the impact we have on the health and well-being of all life on Earth. We are one with everything. And lest, if we do not honor the interconnectivity that is the fragile web of life and biodiversity as we know it today, and do something to ameliorate the dire path we are heading down, we may, in our negligence today, rob our children's children of the richness which is our natural heritage, the legacy of the wild earth from which we emerged is in jeopardy. Every little imagined solution to our current predicament helps. We can turn anything around with our love and imagination. At least that's what the frog told me. JK. Thank you very much. Yes.
You know how some people say that the human brain is only used like 14% around, you know? Do you think, do you believe that or not? Yes, no?
Say it one more time, the human.
Brain that uses we only use like 14% of our brain.
Okay, yep.
And if we do you think if we get access to 100%, would there be a whole different painting? All the videos and painting, or?
With regard to painting? That's a great question. So the question is that given the idea that we only use a fraction of our brain while we're living our lives, whether if we were able to somehow access and use more of our brain, would painting look differently? And I think the answer's got to be, of course, you know, that what would be interesting to someone who uses 50% of her brain or his brain would certainly, in the visual world be, you know, would be different. Yeah. You know, and also noting about that, you know, some scientists, brain scientists, believe that there's more connections in the human brain than there are molecules in the known physical universe. So just get your head around that. You can't. It's bigger than you can imagine. Like that number is vastly larger than anything your brain is capable of imagining. But that's how complex the human brain is. Yeah. Yes, please.
For someone starting out painting and someone trying to get into it, would you recommend just sort of, you know, trying to get through a painting no matter what, even if, you know, you're not very skilled, or would you recommend just slowing down and really trying to pay attention and, you know, maybe you only get one painting done, but it's pretty decent? Or would you recommend just keep going and keep trying and eventually you'll get that?
Yeah, great question. So the question is if, you know, starting out painting and you're working on a painting, would you recommend sort of kind of just sticking with it and going forward, or, you know, ditching it and kind of make other paintings, or, you know, and for a beginning painter, my personal, and this is sort of comes down to my way or my style, my personal feeling and answer to your question is that, you know, as a beginning painter, it's good to make as many paintings as you can. Because as the great American art teacher, Robert Henri, said in his book, The Art Spirit, you know, you teach yourself art, right? So you're your own teacher. And the way that you teach yourself is by painting. And so, you know, he says, save your old work. You have more to learn from your old work than anyone else can teach you. So, you know, look, as my art teachers told me, like, this is not art now with capital A, right? All the art that you're making now is for you to learn, and I say make lots of it, make it as quickly as you can, you know, because you know, if you make 10 paintings of the same figure, and in each of those 10 paintings you're looking at a different aspect, on your 11th painting you can bring them all together, you know. But if you've only made one, and, you know, most of the times you're painting over some of the stuff that you're exploring and learning about while you're painting, you know, all of that is lost. Whereas, so, yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
What kind of impact does your son have on your art?
Yeah, so the question is what kind of an impact does my son, Darwin, who's 10, have on my art? And the answer is that he, you know, first of all, he is, you know, seeing my artwork through a child's eye is helpful for me because, you know, kids are honest, right? And they just, they say it, they tell it how it is. And so he is a great critic for me because he'll just say, hey, Dad, you know, look, you gotta work on those eyes. I like it, but, you know, definitely work on the eyes, you know. I would say after that, it's probably almost done, you know. And so, yeah, he's just like a little storehouse of genius, kind of wisdom and remarks. You know, and he also kind of coaches me toward like a simplicity and purity of visual language. Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions about anything? Yes.
I'm curious, when you start a painting, like, say he's on this wall, do you have an idea what it's going to look like when it's done, or do you just sort of go where it leads you?
Yeah, great question, which is that, you know, starting some of these paintings, is there a conception of, you know, like you know, do I know what it's going to look like? And the answer is sometimes yes and sometimes no. So depending on, and most of the time I would say not really. So oftentimes I'll take a paintbrush and, draw something out with some diluted paint as sort of a basis for like what it might look like those sort of figurative frogs on the end wall as an example. I knew that I wanted to make a series of those frogs for a show, and I didn't quite know what they would be like or how I would actually articulate kind of the image. And so I just had all the canvases down on the floor and I sort of drew out what they were, and they all kind of like turned out a little bit differently. So I don't really start with a real clear idea about colors or even shapes or anything. In fact, all these paintings on this wall, just came from nowhere, really just kind of came from the process of painting, being in the act of painting. That red one being a great example. I worked on that painting for a long time in my studio in England, and there's probably 15 different paintings underneath that red surface. And I was working from this studio at the time that only had cold water. And I would go back to the studio, to go to the restroom to go to the bathroom and, use that bar of soap with the cold water to try to get like my hands, which were covered in paint, clean. I'd be standing there with the cold water trying to get this paint off my hands. It's dark outside. And I looked down at one point and there's these cans of enamel paint that had been used for some project around the communal studios. And one of them was red. I thought, this has been sitting there forever. So I brought it back to my studio, and one day I just thought, well, this painting's not working so far. What would it be if I just kind of got generous with this red enamel paint, and so that's how that painting came to be. Certainly I did not anticipate that happening. Yeah, and then other paintings, say, for example, some of the birds, like if I'm going to paint this European kingfisher, I know very much that it better look kind of like the photo I'm working from, or else I just give up. So, yeah. There's probably time for one or two more questions. Yeah, please.
If you got the opportunity to go back in time, would you change any of your paintings?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's actually kind of a philosophical question. And the question is if I had the chance to go back in time, would I change any of my paintings? And the answer is definitely no. Like honoring myself right now is as important as, say, honoring myself 10 years from now. And the same goes for 10 years prior. The act of painting is part of life itself. And, life, as a rule, is imperfect. It's sort of like accepting it just as it is, and being happy, regardless of what your expectations or hopes for something might be, just having a peace with what it is, which is to say that, yeah, I look at some of my older paintings and I say, those aren't that good, right? And, but who am I to judge, really? It's not, it was not until I was in art school that I really kind of honored and respected myself and my ability to draw. Because prior to going to art school, I had it that I could not draw. Like I was not as accomplished as some of the other draftsmen and draftspeople in my class. And yet, to my great relief and surprise, my teachers said, well, if everyone's aspiring to make drawings in a particular way, take a look at Brad's drawings, because that's what we want you to, to be working toward. And so, like, there's no sort of ideal in making art other than that you are somehow fulfilling on whatever it is that you're committed to inside of, what you're up to, which is to say, like, a lot of painters are really strong believers in freedom, right? I paint because no one tells me how to paint. No one can tell me what to do, it's impossible for me to make mistakes, so long as I'm, yeah. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.